Collaboration between the UK and Africa webinar run by Innovate UK KTN. I'm Chris Till. I'm a knowledge transfer manager in the agri-food team with specialism in plants and crops. And we've got co-host Cameron Davies, who is the Agri-Food Africa Connect knowledge transfer manager. We're also joined by the rest of the agri-food team, as well as Andy McLean, who's from the events, and she's wonderfully set up the rest of this webinar. So welcome. Hopefully this is going to be a really informal, exciting event where you can basically exchange innovation ideas or knowledge transfer from the UK and Africa, so we can stimulate this really interesting bilateral or bidirectional, exchange platform. So with that, I just go through a few housekeeping. So if you could just during the presentations, particularly the keynotes and the pictures, just keep your microphone muted. If you would like to, during these, just use the chat function, which can be found in the toolbar below. Just basically ask questions or drop your email address. This is the really fantastic platform to do that. If you do have any technical problems, you can scroll and direct message Andy McLean, who will be able to assist you throughout the event. This webinar is being recorded, and after the event, we will make it available online. So if you have missed something or you wanted to, go back and revisit, we'll make that available for you. We'll, however, say all the networking breakout sessions that we're running later, they aren't being recorded. So this is a bit more of an informal platform. Nothing you say will be held against you in evidence. Brilliant. Next one, please. So Innovate UK KTN and the Agri-Food team is who are running this event. Slide, please. What do we do? So basically, we exist to connect innovators with new partners and opportunities beyond existing thinking. And this is basically to help accelerate ambitious ideas into real-world solutions. Now, agroforestry is touted as one of the best ways that humans can address the issues of climate change through sequestration of carbon, and also things like stabilized tables. So one of the biggest projects that we work on in the agri-food team is this Agri-Food Africa Connect, and this is basically bringing organisations and people from the UK and Africa together to address key agri-food challenges in Africa. But also, what we've really understood is actually there's a real need for knowledge exchange and innovation from the Africa side, also in the UK. This is especially apparent with things like the changing climate in the UK. We're suffering greater droughts, and this is a lived experience that in Africa has been, present for a lot longer. So we feel that this knowledge transfer and innovation is a really, really important bi-directional thing that needs to occur. I think platforms like this are a really, really exciting way that we can bring both parties around the same table to have the shared learning experience. And obviously, Zoom webinars have their pitfalls, but I think that this is obviously the best way we can attract such a diverse and excited and engaged audience. As I just said, we are connecting UK and Africa through events such as this. We have funding calls such as the Innovation Awards, which recently ended, but there'll be other pots of money available in the future. And we have these networking and sharing platforms. Basically, this is to realise the sustainability of management of food production systems, a way that alleviates poverty, enhances economic prosperity, and delivers improved well-being. And this programme is being delivered by the Innovate UK KTN team, and it's part of the GCRF Agri-Food Africa programme. There we go. And this is a £26 million funded programme by the GCRF Research Fund. What is today about? It's just a platform to discuss the challenges, success stories around agroforestry and the adoption of this land management strategy in both UK and across Africa. We appreciate that there are the huge differences between both contexts, and even across Africa, there's no such thing as a homogeneous agroforestry effort. However, we think there is actually quite a lot of synergy and shared learning that's possible between both systems. This is a real opportunity for you to forge these powerful connections with companies or organizations you want to work with to stimulate knowledge transfer innovation. So it's main to expect from today, particularly in the breakout sessions, is if you've got, there's no such thing as a stupid question. If you've got an idea or you want to find someone to talk to in these breakout sessions, this is your opportunity. What we will deliver at the end of it as well is a collaboration document, which will allow you to basically pick up everyone who's attended the session and to follow up on those later on. So don't worry if you haven't managed to catch someone's email today. Everyone who's willing to has previously given us our details, and we'll disseminate that out later, so you can indeed make the connections at a later date. Next slide, please. So this is a quick agenda for today. So once I finish waffling on, we've got three fantastic keynote speakers. So we've got Elaine Springgay from FAO, who's going to give a more international focused talk about agroforestry. We follow then by Evelyne Kiptot, who's a social scientist working in agroforestry for 20 plus years. She worked for IUK and these sorts of massive organizations, so hugely has huge amount of expertise in agroforestry. And then finally, the team from Newcastle University, so James Standen, Marion, Pfeifer, and Yit Arn Teh are going to give us a UK and Africa perspective and hopefully show where there is some synergies between both. We can have a brief question and answer session for all speakers, and then we'll go into this pitching section where we've selected a short, 10 2-minute pitches that will hopefully help identify the breadth, depth, and also the exciting projects that are going on within agroforestry in both sides of the UK and across Africa, which will then hopefully make the breakout sessions and networking opportunities that a little bit more focused and engaging. And beyond that, so we should have you wrapped up and ready for lunch about 12 o'clock. So next slide, please. With that, I'm just going to give a very quick introduction to the keynote speakers because they'll do a lot better job than I will. So first off, we're going to have Elaine Springgay, who's going to provide this international perspective. So she's an agroforestry officer at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, so FAO. Finally, we've got Evelyne Kiptot, agroforestry rural advisory services, agricultural extension consultant, and social scientist. And then the team from Newcastle University. So we've got James Standen, who we recently actually went to visit the Cockle Park facility, which demonstrated, real world agroforestry system. And it was really, really fantastic. So James manages the farms up in Newcastle University. Yit is a professor of soil science, and Marion is the associate professor of landscape ecology and management, Newcastle University. So a real, hopefully, breadth and depth of agroforestry across both systems going to be displayed to you today. So with that, Elaine, if you'd like to share your screen and welcome you as the first keynote speaker. Thank you for attending and willing to speak for us.
Thanks so much, Chris, for the introduction and for this opportunity to speak. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. So as Chris mentioned, I'm Elaine Springgay. I'm the agroforestry officer based at FAO in our headquarters in Rome, Italy. We primarily work at a global level, primarily working with developing countries. So I'll provide a brief overview of agroforestry as it stands internationally. I'll try and also give a bit of an African perspective. And last but not least, I'll talk a little bit about what FAO is doing on agroforestry, or what my program is doing on agroforestry specifically. So I'm sure most of us know, or if not all of us know, that agroforestry is a collective term for land use systems and technologies in which a combination of woody perennials and agricultural crops and or animals deliberately inhabit the same area in some spatial and or temporal arrangement. So practices can range from everything from home gardens and swidden agriculture to even alley cropping and field boundaries. It's often employed as a strategy to protect forests as part of buffer or transitional zones, offering livelihood opportunities that reduce pressures on forests and promote more sustainable natural resource management. While the term was actually coined in the 1970s, the concept has been widely practiced in some shape or form for centuries, if not millennia. But in the last 40 years, it has been promoted in development and environmental agendas as a more sustainable agricultural solution, balancing food security and socioeconomic growth with environmental sustainability. And agroforestry has experienced popularity as in flows, partly due to its mixed success to effectively address complex environmental and socioeconomic issues. So currently, agroforestry is gaining a lot of momentum as a solution to combat climate change, halt deforestation, conserve biodiversity, reverse land degradation, promote restoration, and increase food security and reduce poverty. So for example, in the nationally determined commitments to contributions to the Paris Agreement, 40% of non-Annex 1 countries propose agroforestry as a solution to combat climate change. Agroforestry is similarly recognized as a solution in restoration commitments. So of the 2.2 billion hectares identified for restoration worldwide, 1.5 billion hectares are best suited for mosaic restoration, where forests and trees are combined with other land uses, such as agriculture. And an additional 1 billion hectare of land would also benefit from the strategic establishment of trees to increase agricultural productivity and ecosystem service provision. So when properly implemented, agroforestry systems have proven to improve income generation while conserving ecosystems and their functionality. This increased production diversity reduces risks of crop failure or loss from pests, diseases, and natural disasters. And this diversity also creates more steady and diversified revenue. Agroforestry also increases land productivity and soil fertility by reducing soil erosion and improving soil properties such as moisture, organic matter, biodiversity, and nutrients. These systems also increase biodiversity. By increasing biodiversity, this also includes, these are beneficial to production such as pollinators. And increased biodiversity in agroforestry means more habitat for disturbance tolerant species, opportunities to preserve genetic materials, and improved connectivity of habitats. So the question is, if agroforestry is such a promising silver bullet solution, then why has it been so challenging to implement at broader scales? One of the reasons is because it's diverse and contextual in nature. And this is both a strength and weakness for agroforestry. On one hand, it's a customizable or bespoke concept where the system, species, and management regimes can be adapted to specific objectives, as well as environmental and socioeconomic contexts. But on the other hand, the diversity and complexity of these systems means that knowledge and experience transfer can be limited, and it is challenging to measure success at broader scales. So while access to technical knowledge and extension services to ensure proper implementation are challenges, often the biggest hurdles to agroforestry are unrelated to production. Rather, they're related to whether the enabling conditions are in place. So, have we addressed insecure tenure? There are often unclear institutional responsibilities, limited incentives to take on agroforestry. We're often dealing with small operational scales, high labor costs, limited market access, and a lack of business models. These are some of the major obstacles. And so while agroforestry may boast multiple co-benefits, the trade-offs and investment costs are real. So if a farmer does not see short-term return on the investment, either in reduced cost or increased profits, then the likelihood of their commitment to agroforestry and ultimately its success will be diminished. At the same time, though, these challenges don't need to be roadblocks. They can be opportunities. So agroforestry should not just be seen as a sustainable land management approach for subsistence agriculture. It is really a food production system. So between 1999 and 2008, the yield of major tree products more than doubled, while the production value tripled. So in 2018, these major tree products were worth around 194 billion US dollars globally. And the export value of these tree products was around 153 billion US dollars, 85%, which was generated by only 5 crops, namely cocoa, coffee, rubber, oil, and the 5th one we're escaping at the moment. So a global economy and increased demand for tropical tree products means that there is actually large investment potential in building markets for agroforestry products, as well as their value chains domestically, but also for export. And at the end of the day, agroforestry requires the convergence of many sectors and interests, and there is lots of global opportunities where to incentivize this convergence. So in terms of FAO's comparative advantage, we have an institutional mandate as well as expertise in agriculture, forestry, livestock, and fisheries. But ultimately, to see success, we all need to come together, work together to reduce competition, enhance complementarities, and this is to achieve wood and food security for a better environment, production, nutrition, and life. So in terms of agroforestry in Africa, agroforestry in its various forms has a long history and is practiced throughout the continent. It's estimated that there are 40 to 50 million hectares of agroforestry systems in Africa and 700 million hectares of forest, which means about 50% of the continent's population is dependent on tree-based systems. There have been a number of recent national initiatives to increase agroforestry, including the Malawi Agroforestry Food Security Program, the expansion of agroforests in Niger through Assisted Natural Regeneration, or ANR, as well as the Rwanda Strategy and Action Plan, which is currently being implemented and continues until 2027. Despite these success stories, adoption has not been widespread and mainstreamed, suggesting there's a need for support in integrating agroforestry strategies into public policies and the establishment of effective incentives. And at the end of the day, agroforestry is an important strategy for meeting land restoration, tree cover increase, and climate change mitigation and adaptation goals at national, regional, and even global levels. It has a key role to play in landscape scale schemes such as REDD+ or AFALU, regional initiatives like the AFR 100, Bond Challenge, and even the Regraining Africa program. Exports of coffee and cocoa have increased from Africa exponentially in recent years. So again, we've seen cocoa exports doubled between 1998 and 2020, and the value of production has tripled. So in 2020, this was worth about 8 billion US dollars. And there's a significant opportunity to transition away from monocropping and increase shaded agroforestry, coffee and cocoa systems, to contribute to carbon sequestration targets. In terms of FAO's priority areas of work, and I see that we've got someone who likes to doodle in meetings like myself, but we've got basically 5 main priority areas. The first is this idea of agroforestry as nature-based solutions to halt deforestation. We really want to start looking more into the socioeconomics of agroforestry, the direct and indirect benefits. FAO is big on capacity development and training. We're also in charge of a lot of monitoring, and we have agroforestry is reported in our Global Forest Resources Assessment, or FRA, which is produced every 5 years. And of course, advocacy and raising awareness on policy and incentives for agroforestry is a main part of our work. We just had a global agroforestry capacity needs assessment We're in the process of finalizing our report. This was done over the summer. We had almost 1,600 responses from over 150 countries, and the results were not that surprising. You know, there's a lot of knowledge out there in terms of what to plant and how to grow, what kind of systems are in place, what kind of species, community engagement, etc., co-development with people. But at the same time, a major gap is the economics of agroforestry. How do we make agroforestry economically viable and sustainable for farmers, addressing short, medium, and long-term return on investment, and how to develop markets and value chains, and also address supply chains as well. So one of the things people would like to see FAO work towards actually is supporting national policies and incentives, and better understand the cost-benefit analysis of agroforestry. These are some of our current activities. So we're working in close collaboration with C4 ICRAF to develop a guide on how we can develop the business case for agroforestry. So this is not giving a business case, because obviously business cases are just as customized as agroforestry itself. So, but how do we help people to build those business cases? We're also working with the International Commission on Poplar and Other Fast-Growing Species on looking at the role of fast-growing tree species in agroforestry. We're developing farmer field school curricula for agroforestry as well, with hopes of having that curricula deployed sometime next year. And we want to look a lot at the frontiers of agriculture and forests. How do we better manage these areas so we do not see continued deforestation and potentially restore them? And also looking at providing national guidance for agroforestry to countries. So I'll end it there, and I'm happy to stay on in case there are questions, and happy to talk with the rest of you later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elaine. That was an absolutely fantastic presentation. Really lovely international overview, but with obviously specific African examples. So I think you've really highlighted there all the fantastic work FAO are doing in the area. Next up, we've got Evelyne Kiptot, who's the social scientist who has been working in agroforestry for 20+ years. So she has a fantastic level of expertise and experience in the area. So Evelyne, would you like to share your screen and begin your presentation?
Hi, Christopher. I've just come back to my system. What's the situation? Are we in the break?
Evelyne, are you available to share your screen?
Yes,
Oh.
I'm available, trying to get the presentation.
Well, thank you. Brilliant, we can see it now. That's wonderful. Cheers.
Hello, everyone. My name is Evelyne Kiptot. I'm an agroforester, and I'm going to give a brief presentation about agroforestry research and development in Africa. I'm going to share 3 success stories, and then I'll talk about some of the challenges that are faced in agroforestry and emerging opportunities. So just to remind ourselves about challenges that are facing Africa, we know that Africa faces severe food shortage, fuel, wood, and fodder primarily due to increasing human and livestock population and subsistence agriculture. There's been a declining soil fertility due to continuous cropping without replenishing nutrients. In the past, farmers used to practice what we call traditional shifting cultivation and fallow systems, but because of the increase in population, land has been subdivided, so farmers are not able to practice shifting cultivation. And then there's also the problem of low quality and quantity of feed, which is limiting livestock productivity. So agroforestry has the potential to increase food and nutritional security, sequester carbon, thus contributing to mitigation of climate change. What is agroforestry? Yeah, agroforestry is a relatively new name for a set of old practices. When ICRAF was established in the 1970s, there was ambiguity surrounding its definition. So there's been a lot of work, there's been a lot of discussion on the definition of agroforestry. But what I'm going to give you is just a simplified version of the definition of agroforestry, which is a farming system in which perennial trees and shrubs are integrated with crops and or livestock on the same land management system, either sequentially or simultaneously. And for it to qualify as an agroforestry system, there has to be some form of interaction between the various components. So why agroforestry? It is a low-cost land use system that requires minimal inputs, yet offers a diversity of products and services. It also requires very little land, as trees can be planted around the homestead and along boundaries, so it doesn't take up a lot of land, and it requires relatively little labor. Once the trees are established, then you really don't have to spend time managing them. And then there's also minimum cash input for the purchase of seed or seedlings. I'm going to share success stories of 3 agroforestry practices from different parts of Africa. The first one is fodder production in East Africa, fertilizer trees in Southern Africa, and fruit production in West Africa and Eastern Africa. So I'll start with the fodder production in East Africa. So Africa farmers have fed tree foliage to livestock for centuries. It's not something new. This is something that has been going on for many years. What is new is that there are new agroforestry systems that have been introduced. And over the last 3 decades or so, ICRAF and national partners have been assessing the performance of various tree species for their suitability. And initially they started with the Caliandra calathiosis, Lucina leucocephala, and Sesbania sesban. And they did find out that Sesbania and Lucina had shortcomings. Sesbania could not withstand frequent pruning, because if you need a fodder, you have to frequently prune, but Sesbania could not withstand frequent pruning. While Lucina leucocephala was attacked by an aphid, and so it wasn't really found suitable. The most promising was Caliandra calathiosis, which has been widely adopted by farmers. Since then, other suitable species have been found promising, and they include Lucina trichondra, Morus alba, and tree lucerne. Sorry. So where are these trees grown? So as I mentioned earlier, they do not take much land. You can plant them in hedges around the farm. You can also plant them along contour bands and terraces and sloping land. They can also be intercropped in lines with Napier grass. Results from intercropping experiments have shown that introducing Caliandra into Napier grass has little effect on the grass yield. Planting for these particular species or the shrubs that I mentioned is done at a spacing of about ½ meter, and they are pruned 9 to 12 months after transplanting, and pruning is carried out 4 or 5 times a year. So the research that has been done over the past years has shown that yields roughly about 1.5 kilograms of dry matter, and for fresh biomass it's about 4.5 kilograms per tree per year, planted at 2 trees per meter in hedges under farmers' conditions. So a farmer would actually need about 500 shrubs to feed a cow throughout the year at a rate of 2 kilograms dry matter per day. So this amount would provide an effective protein supplement to the basal feed of Napier grass and crop residues for increased milk production. So the species that are commonly grown in Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, in Tanzania are, for example, in Kenya, we have Kaliandra, Lucina, Trichandra, Tree Lucerne, and more as well, but these are the ones that have really been taken up by farmers. In Uganda and Rwanda, we have 2 species that have been widely adapted, that is Kaliandra calathethis and Lucina trichandra. And in Tanzania, we have Lucina leucocephala and Kaliandra calathethis. So what are the benefits of using fodder trees? Of course, apart from the fact that there's increase in milk production and increase in butterfat content, they also provide a source of firewood. And then they also provide forage for bees to make honey. For example, Kaliandra has very beautiful flowers that are liked by bees. Then the leaf fall and roots also improve soil quality. And then we have stakes for supporting vegetables like tomatoes and climbing beans, because once you get the leafy biomass, there's the woody part of it that can be used for stakes. And then when the leafy biomass is fed to livestock, they produce very, very good manure that is rich in nutrients. In terms of adoption and dissemination pathway, we found that these particular shrubs are very attractive to farmers because they require little or no cash to establish, and they do not take up much of farmers' land. And then inputs required are seed and minimal amounts of labor, which farmers are usually willing to provide. However, these shrubs are very knowledge intensive. That is, they require considerable skills that most farmers do not have. Because of the difficulty in acquiring knowledge and skills, and at times the technology does not spread so easily. However, many institutions, including ICRAF, has been working with farmers to see how these particular technologies can spread. And so far, about 300 organizations spread across Kenya, Uganda, and Rwanda, and Tanzania are currently promoting these shrubs. Next, I'll go to fertilizer trees. These are commonly used. Fertilizer tree is used to refer to the utilization of nitrogen-fixing leguminous trees in cereal production systems to improve the availability of nitrogen to crops. There are various types of fertilizer trees, the practices, and the most commonly used by farmers are improved fallows, biomass transfer, mixed intercropping, where you have the tree and the legume component. You have the crop, tree, legume intercropping, and then we have hedgerow intercropping, or sometimes called early cropping. So one of the options that I've just mentioned is improved tree or shrub fallows. This is whereby you have shrubs planted at very, very high density, and then they are harvested after about 1 to 2 years. Once they are harvested, and then the farmers can come in and plant their crops. The species you see there is called Tephrosia. It's widely grown in Eastern Africa and Southern Africa. It's very, very good in terms of replenishing soil fertility. And then the other technology or practice is biomass transfer. This is whereby we have leafy biomass that is brought from elsewhere and incorporated into the soil during planting. One of the species that is commonly used for this particular technology is known as Titonia diversifolia. It's been widely used in Western Kenya. So what are the benefits of fertilizer trees? Maize yields, okay, a lot of research has been done on fertilizer trees, and it has been found that maize yields have generally increased from less than a ton per hectare to 2 or more in Malawi, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Fertilizer tree systems practiced on, for example, a 0.2 hectare area increased maize consumption for a family of 5 by extra 57 to 143 days. They also, of course, farmers also get firewood reduction in weeds. Because these shrubs are grown in very high density, they're able to get rid of the weeds. One of the notorious weeds that is common in these areas is the striga weed. And once you have improved fallows, then the striga weed is reduced. And then there's the improvement in soil organic matter. There was a study that was done on the impact of adoption of fertilizer trees on livelihoods in Malawi, Zambia, and Mozambique. And the results were very positive. Farmers there, of course, did mention that there's an increase in yield, food security, increase in income, increased savings, reduction in striga, that's the weed, and then there's soil improvement. Next, I'll go to indigenous and exotic fruit tree species. Deficiency of vitamins is prevalent in most parts of Africa. They're below the recommended daily amount. And we know that, of course, those of you who know about Africa and have worked in Africa know that Africa has many, many indigenous fruit trees. Although relatively unknown in the global markets, are locally of large importance for food nutrition security and income generation. A number of indigenous fruit trees are currently undergoing domestication, especially in West Africa. So when ICRAF and its national partners started working on indigenous fruit trees, they first of all did what we call a priority setting to identify species that farmers are interested in having on their farms. So this priority setting was done in Cameroon, Kenya, Malawi, and many other African countries. But what I have here is I picked 3, Cameroon, Kenya, and Malawi. And they picked on 10 priority fruit trees for promotion, both indigenous and exotic. For Cameroon, we have Alanblackia, bitter cola, bush mango, colonna, the list is long. And then Kenya, we have baobab, tamarind, desert palm. Desert palm is the Spelanitis. For those of you who have a bit of knowledge in forestry, Spelanitis aegyptiaca. And then marula is the Sclerocaria birrea, which is also common in Malawi. In Malawi, we have baobab, marula, tamarind, and wild locut. For the exotic species, the most common ones and which were identified to be a priority in terms of promotion in Cameroon, avocado, citrus species, mango. In Kenya, we have avocado, citrus species, macadamia, mango, papaya, and passion fruit. And in Malawi, we have avocado, citrus species, macadamia nut, mango, and papaya. So in terms of the indigenous fruit trees research and development, what is it that is being done? So we have a participatory tree domestication, and this involves a collection of germplasm, selection of superior genotypes, and vegetative propagation. This work has been going on for the last 20 or so years. Farmers are trained in appropriate techniques for handling germplasm and then encouraged to apply newly acquired skills to the fruit trees that they find growing in the lands, naturally in the landscapes. So in order to further promote the participatory domestication approach in West Africa, rural resource centers managed by local communities are now being used as training grounds or hubs and distribution of high quality propagation materials. They also serve as a marketing centers for tree products. In terms of exotic fruit trees, what is being done is we all know that, of course, there are many of the cultivars now grown in African smallholders are derived from ancient introductions, but they do not perform well when compared to modern cultivars. For example, in Kenya, we have local mango varieties that are considered to have a lot of fiber and are not well matched to current consumer preferences. Of course, breeding is expensive and it takes a long time. So what is happening is that organizations are bringing in improved cultivars from elsewhere. Once these cultivars have been brought, then they are tested for performance in different, to see whether they adapt to different ecological zones. Then what is also being done is to support small-scale commercial suppliers of planting material, and then expanding and improving markets and marketing system for these exotic fruits. So what are the challenges? One of the challenges is that there's a narrow species range, especially for the fodder species. And then there's a lack of a functional supply seed system. Decentralized commercial models provide greater potential than government and NGO models. We have a weak extension support. And then in terms of fruits, there's lack of fruit processing facilities, which lead to high post-harvest losses. And there's the poorly organized fruit marketing pathways along the value chain. So what are the emerging opportunities? One of them is the diversification of tree species, especially for fodder. And then there's the linking farmers to markets, better harvest and post-harvest techniques to improve product quality based on market requirements. Another issue is the storage facilities to allow sales to be scheduled to avoid market glut. And then also strengthen farmer producer groups to allow direct negotiation with wholesalers, and they need to introduce the market information and credit facilities. You know, farmers lose out when you bring in middlemen, because at the end of the day, when we have middlemen, it is the middlemen who benefit. Farmers don't benefit much when you have middlemen. So when you strengthen farmer groups, then farmers are able to negotiate with the buyers. And then training farmers on propagation skills, on-farm management processing to help improve post-harvest losses, and then providing access to improved germ plasting, because this is really, really a major problem. Farmers are not able to access improved germ plasting. And then last but not least is exploring innovative extension approaches. Thank you.
Thank you, Evelyne. That was wonderful. Very comprehensive, and just shown, I think, the diversity and breadth of the work and expertise you've got in this area. So really, really appreciate your time and sharing that knowledge with everyone here. Just in the interest of time, I think we're going to have to keep the Q&A quite short in order to keep the keynotes, you know, so it's more important for them to talk basically and demonstrate what's going on. So with that, our final set of keynote speakers are from Newcastle University. So I believe Marion is kicking us off. Marion, take it away. Thank you.
Okay. Let me start that. Can you see the slides?
Yes, that's fab. Thank you.
So I will talk a little bit about the project that I have been involved in Tanzania with colleagues at ZUA, so Kenya University of Agriculture, and colleagues from Kenya, NMK, that's National Museums, Kenya. And there's two other speakers that will talk about how we try to use the approach and the findings we had in Tanzania to see how they would work out in the north of England as a sort of south to north knowledge transfer. The research or the project that we have been doing was, when it started, primarily a research project focused on what are the natural capital benefits from, say, forests, from trees, from water, from biodiversity to farmers. It was called AgriSys Tanzania. It was funded through BBSRC, GCRF, like an UKI funding scheme, and it was quite a lot of money that we had to work with partners in Tanzania in the Kilimanjaro Valley to look at agroforestry systems and to look at what are the benefits or the costs farmers might have from having trees on their farms or near their farms. And then after that, we followed this up with the Corridor project that was funding through the Science for Nature and People partnership. And what this allowed us to do is to really consider, like, what is the process of potentially restoring trees in the landscape, if that is what is desired by farmers or other stakeholders, and how would you do that in a way that is equitable and inclusive, spreading the costs and maximizing benefits. Now, we have heard about the services from trees on the farms, right? Agroforestry, yes, you can all get these benefits: carbon sequestration, windbreak, biodiversity and pollination, soil carbon. Some of these benefits, they accrue they are more important at global scales, perhaps, or to people who or northern countries that have a lot of carbon emissions. some of these benefits accrue at local scales to the farmers, depending on what they farm. And what's often forgotten is there are costs. There are quite significant costs that can arise to the farmers. And these costs, I'd like to highlight them here, especially in our landscape. And I don't think that is unique to our landscape in Tanzania. In the Southern Agriculture Tanzania Coal Corridor is pests and crop raiders. The pests would be insect pests. They do use natural habitats, and we don't know very much how they use the natural habitats, including the trees you're planting. So do they use them as overwintering habitats during the dry or rainy season? And then our case study landscape, and that is a problem in Tanzania, is elephants or other large mammals coming from the forest or from other tree cover habitats, using the trees in the landscape as a traveling tool, and then raiding the crops, which is of course incurring a lot of costs to the farmers who are carrying the risks. If they lose their crops, they have nothing left at the end of the day. So that connectivity that is often highlighted as a positive thing for biodiversity can also have negative impacts. That's partly for large wildlife, but also disease spillover. If you have wildlife coming into contact with livestock, you can get a disease spillover, including through ticks or other vectors. And then there is that's often highlighted by farmers, and there is a lack of knowledge on that. So shade and root competition if you have trees on your farm, and that you, of course, you have less land to grow your crop that you're primarily interested in, depending on what crop you're interested in. In our landscape, that's primarily maize, rice, and increasingly so sugarcane, but they are farming for diversity. They know the risks from climate change. Climate change is affecting the area, and they are very much interested in having diverse cropping systems to maintain their livelihoods, but also their food security. And then we started to look at what these benefits and costs really are, asking farmers, but also measuring them. We did a lot of biophysical measurements at landscape scale on the farm and in natural habitats. We came up with this a kind of framework to think about what are the potential pathways from what the governance looks like, land tenure, land access, what the socioeconomic conditions look like. Does the farmer has access to resources, to trees, to other crops and their varieties, what they can grow, and how they make decisions, how they influence decision, and then how these decisions shapes the landscape configuration. So where are the trees? Where are the patches of forest? Where are the woodlands? Where are the villages? And that will affect your benefits that you get, like where are the pollinators, and the costs, like where are the pests, right? And we have been looking at that. We can model that. We can use all kinds of models, and you may be aware of some of like ecosystem service models. But what we then realized is that's not enough. We can model and map all kinds of things. And then we talked to the farmers and we asked them, what do you think about that? And then they said, well, that's all fine and well, but there are other constraints that we also have. And there are still knowledge gaps that we would like to highlight to you. And we took that at basically like, oh God, we didn't even consider that. So there's a lot of knowledge gaps that exist, and they don't know where to plant in the landscape to make the most for them. Like, do they plant it along the riverways? Do they plant it along the farm boundaries? Where would they like to plant them? How do they interact with their specific crop type? There's not a lot of information. Maize doesn't need pollinators, for example. Pumpkin does, but pumpkin, they don't eat the fruits, they eat the leaves. So pollinators are pretty much not important. So there's a difference between what crops are actually independent on certain pollinators, on what the farmer would benefit from. And then, of course, like in terms of what they highlighted is like, if I plant a tree, if I plant a native tree species, I don't necessarily own that tree that is owned by the government. And when I lose access rights to my own land because that tree is standing there, I can't do nothing about it once it's planted. So these are key issues that we are now struggling with, trying to think about how to get more trees in the farmed landscape. So it's a key challenges that we have identified for that landscape in Tanzania was a lack of data of how the trees affect crops or livestock directly, their health, the productivity, the yields. From the few data that we have, trees are positive or not negative on crop yield, but it's very limited amount of data so far that we have, and there's actually not that much data that you find in the literature on it. Then there is a lot of talking about knowledge frameworks. Different stakeholders have different interests. We had a lot of NGOs, or we have them in the landscape. They're mostly interested in getting more trees, either in the protected areas or on the actual farmed land, and they're pushing the trees out, but there's little in support of how to maintain a tree, how to grow a tree, or what that tree might actually do to the farm. And then, of course, like the land access governance is super important, especially to the farmer. And all these we have found are hindering the increased adoption of agroforestry practices. And then we really try to understand actually what the farmers want. Trees feature. They are happy, like they are, as you highlighted before, they have a history of growing trees in their farm, but that will change depending on if their economic situation changes. So at the moment, they are converting to sugarcane, increasingly so, and trees don't go well with the sugarcane, they think. So there will be trees disappearing actually from the landscape. But if you ask them what their visions are for their farms, and we let a lot of farmers draw these kind of pictures, trees still feature in certain combinations. And then we thought like, oh, that's really insightful. And then I talked to James and to Yit, and they had started this agroforestry stuff here in the north of the UK. And then we thought like, oh, let's see whether we can roll out the approach we use in Tanzania here. So when we started doing that, we did some interviews with farmers in Northumberland area. This is here like around Newcastle. And what we did is we asked them, what do you think agroforestry? Would you use it? What's the potential for it? And then there actually is a lack of clear definition of what agroforestry is. When you highlighted that the shrubs and the hedges could well be agroforestry, and they were like, oh, that's good to know. And they highlighted the positives. So these farmers, when we interviewed them, small study sample size, yes, adaptive grazing, browsing, the potential for shelter, reducing business costs. If you have your livestock in the trees, maybe you can leave it out longer over winter, so your overwintering costs are lower. Plant them along river areas, because for aesthetic reasons, but also to prevent soil erosion, to manage maybe flooding. And then we're interested in cultural values, like trees around the farm buildings, because the farm buildings are ugly. And then they also described barriers, like we asked them the same question like we did in Tanzania, and the constraints they had were almost identical to the ones they highlighted to us in Tanzania. Implementation costs, protection from damage, protection here from deer. In Tanzania, that would be elephants. If you plant fruit trees in Tanzania, you will get more elephants. So if you plant more mangoes, and the farmers like mango trees, you will also get more elephants, and then they struggle. Tree suitability and disease, especially emerging diseases, novel pests is under climate change, and then access to grants and subsidies. And we highlighted these like opportunities and constraints in a policy brief that we have now drafted. And you can just, if you take a picture of that barcode there, not that I know how that works, a student did that for me, you can find the website where all that information as well is. But yeah, I'll then hand over to Yit for his carbon stuff.
Well, yes, thanks, Marion. That's a really nice sort of intro, and to segue over, I think what I was going to briefly talk about is opportunities and challenges for climate change mitigation, because I think within the sort of global north context, that seems to be one of the main drivers for shifting over to agroforestry. I mean, and that's not to say that there aren't, the other aspects around livelihoods and food production aren't important, but it seems like there's a big push towards net zero in agriculture and in different sectors. And so within the UK and other, Western Northern European countries, that is one of the dominant driving forces. And I think, to put it in context, I think this is a recent meta-analysis based on measurements of above ground carbon density. And there's a lot of evidence showing that there's huge potential to increase above ground carbon density, above ground carbon storage with tree planting on farms, as you well know. And Marion, if you could just advance the next the animation. Within a Northern European kind of context, there should be an animation that pops up if you. There you go. Within a Northern European context, there's proportionally speaking, there's a lot more potential for carbon uptake, just because in a lot of sort of late industrial economies, we've just so heavily hammered our landscape that there's almost no tree cover, as you can kind of see from this image. This image here shows a visualization of the amount of broadleaf conifer cover and looking at sort of what would be the equivalent in the tropics of an old growth systems. It's tiny. It's a very small fraction of the landscape. And so proportionately, compared to other places that we work, including Malaysia, that's over 60% forest cover, or Tanzania, that's over 38% forest cover. In the UK, we're looking at small percentages and even tinier percentages of old growth systems. Next slide, please. But I think one of the, even though it's relatively straightforward for us to monitor and measure changes in above ground carbon stocks We have large uncertainties around soil carbon sequestration. So again, this is another meta-analysis looking at a range of different temperate agroforestry systems. And there's not really a clear, clear directions or patterns. There's some evidence that there is an increase, albeit a slight increase in soil carbon sequestration, but a lot, and that's sort of the image that you can see on the left, and I've sort of tried to highlight with the arrows some of these box plots that show changes. And what you see, it's just a very slight upward shift. But huge lack of clarity accounts in terms of what kinds of practice could increase soil carbon storage. So if you take a look at the image on the right, it shows alley cropping systems versus hedgerow and silvopastoral systems. And there's not necessarily a significant a difference amongst them, not so much that you could definitively favor one practice over another. And this could be largely due to the evidence base that we have in sort of temperate systems. There's not enough control studies that allow, paired studies that we can make comparisons from. Next slide, please. I think something that's been hugely underappreciated from a sort of a net zero climate change mitigation perspective is the potential impacts of adoption of agroforestry for reducing emissions of non-CO2 greenhouse gases. And this is something that I think, because the world is very carbon centric and carbon focused, the policy world at the moment, this is something that's been largely ignored. This is some data from my colleagues at Göttingen University working in German agroforestry systems. And they were finding a large reduction in the emissions of the greenhouse gas nitrous oxide, largely because emissions from tree rows, which were not fertilized, were significantly lower. And I've tried to show these with the little red boxes, significantly lower than the cropping systems. Could I have the animation, please? And I think they did some interesting sort of molecular analysis looking at understanding the microbial potential to produce nitrous oxide. And what they found was that a lot of the tree rows, the soils, regardless of where they were in those fields, showed a similar potential to produce nitrous oxide. But what appeared to be really driving the shift was the fact that these tree rows were not being fertilized. And as a consequence, because substrate inputs were low, there wasn't as much emission of nitrous oxide, which is the product of a denitrification or other sort of nitrate reducing processes. Next slide, please. The other issue, I think, and this is something that's kind of cropped up a number of times, is that even though agroforestry is potentially a viable means for sort of meeting some of these net zero targets, it's a proportionality issue. This is some data from one of our colleagues, Paul Burgess, who's at Cranfield University. He recently produced a report for the Woodland Trust. And what he was trying to find is sort of that sort of break-even point when at which point if there's a certain level of uptake of agroforestry, you might be able to use that the carbon sequestered in the above ground biomass to offset other greenhouse gas emissions coming from those farms. And maybe no surprise, there needs to be at least a conversion of more than 30% of current agricultural land in the UK to some form of agroforestry to make that viable. And I apologize for the tiny images. I should have just used one of these rather than the two tables on the right. But so I apologize for that. But if you look at that break-even point, it's not occurring until, say, 2063, 2058. We're going to miss that net zero by 2050 target by a decade or more. Yeah, even with a shift towards agroforestry adoption, well, at least according to his models. Next slide, please. And this is something that's been touched on by other speakers here. Within our context here, there's large questions around adoption barriers, particularly around some of the financial mechanisms. What I've shown on the left here is sort of a graph of our tree planting rates in the UK, which is pretty miserable, really. And we're definitely not hitting our 30,000 hectares of new woodland per year. It's basically flatlined in the last couple of decades. But I think, as Marion and others have pointed out, there are a lot of concerns from farmers about how the adoption of agroforestry practice, how that will impact, for instance, their yield, production of other goods and services that might give them a financial return, and understanding how this fits into the larger subsidy schemes and subsidy structures and so forth. So in the UK at the moment, we're shifting, since our exit from the EU, we're shifting over to new agricultural subsidy policies that are likely to provide significantly fewer payments than before. So we're looking towards the private sector, things like payments for ecosystem service schemes like carbon trading markets and so forth to pick up that shortfall. But there needs to be procedures, methods in place that are widely accepted by a third party, sort of industrial sort of monitoring, verification, and so forth, so that that the potential carbon markets that we're drawing on are assured that that farmers are getting really paid fairly. There's also concerns, as has been discussed, around what are the disservices, what are the potential benefits. I've shown on the right an image here showing hypothetically what the shifts might be in terms of potential increases in benefits or changes in disservices. But in many instances, we don't have a strong enough evidence base within the national context to be assured, or at least to have our stakeholders, our farmers, be assured that that there's enough certainty that they will be rewarded. I think once we need to get past that point, figuring out what are good sort of external standards that can be used and applied that are accepted by industry, accepted by policymakers and government, such that farmers have confidence in that they will receive those payments for ecosystem services, and that private sector as well as government subsidies and so forth are assured that really we're certain about the outcomes. James. Go ahead.
Hi, sorry. Thank you, Marion. Thank you, Yit. I'm, as introduced, I'm the farms director. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of the agroforestry we have up at Newcastle University Farms, and some of the thought process that we went to go, that we established it, and perhaps what comes next. So we have 18 hectares planted, and we chose willow and poplar, and there is a control. There's 5 replicates of that. 24-meter alleyways, 4.6 meter tree strips, and they are there's two double rows of willow and poplar. And I guess why now? Why those trees? Well, I was very interested in Elaine's talk earlier, and what agroforestry is for, food production, that sort of thing. And I was very keen that the field should remain productive on both the woodland part and the farm, the field part. And we wanted to carry on producing food, whether that was arable or in grass, and we wanted to produce something from the trees. We do have willow on the farm elsewhere, so we have experience of that. And I thought that was quite important because it was our first venture into agroforestry, that we wanted to use a tree species that we were familiar with and knew how to manage. So trees went in May 22, and they've grown nicely. There's been quite an interesting variation across the field in terms of the development, and as Evelyne said, that's sort of very knowledge intensive. We're walking across wondering why, because it's very different from another block. But then I think we're the only block of willow and poplar agroforestry in the UK. So we chose those trees because we were familiar with them. We understood how they would work, and there's an infrastructure in the area. We did consider fruit trees, soft fruit trees, nuts, and we decided that wasn't for us at this time. Maybe soon. The market infrastructure for us for fruit just is non-existent in Northumberland. So what would we do with that fruit? And we did consider apple and other sort of top fruit species. And unless I'm going to make a lot of cider for selling to the students, I really didn't think that there was much of a market outlet for us for that one, but perhaps that comes in the future. So what do I want to know? What's coming next? I guess when we look at it, we think, as a farmer looking at it, I guess the first thing we're going to do, because the willow and the popular that we put in does harbour pests, our pest numbers are going to build. And we think over the next 2 or 3 years, we will have to deal with that. We took a decision on the farm 4 years ago not to spray insecticides, and we're increasing our sort of wildlife habitats to be able to cope with those, but that will take a little time to build up as we've just established a whole new system. So we're quite interested in that. We're quite interested in how the crops react. You'll see the yield map on the sort of bottom right-hand corner of the screen there with a lot of red. And we knew it would be like that because we drilled the wheat before we put the trees in, and we ran it over to get the trees in. So the headlands we knew were always going to be poor because we knew we'd be traveling over those. So we're obviously going to be looking at those yield maps as we go through some of the agronomic things. And as Evelyne said, you know, it's very knowledge intensive. We're learning every day, you know, we're learning every day, and we will make mistakes. Not frightened of making mistakes. We know we're going to make them. We just need to learn from them. You know, what do we like about it? It's created a lot of interest. We have, you know, a lot of people who want to come and see it, a lot of people asking us questions that as yet, in all honesty, we don't have the answers for. And I think you will have got that from the sort of speakers at the moment. We're going to build that very quickly, and hopefully we can start to transfer what we've learned to other people. That for us would be discussion groups and farmer meetings, that sort of thing, perhaps coming on these sort of things and telling you what we know. But we see clearly there is a demand. People really do want to know about those things. And so we're going to try and put that together. What next? I've alluded to it. I like it. And you know, as a farmer, my operators on the ground sit at me and scratch their heads a little bit, wondering how we're going to get machinery up and down, and if we ever put livestock in there, how we're going to run that. But I like it. As a university farm, it's created a lot of interest for us. There's you know, there's some real questions to answer, which is good. There's a lot of interest locally and nationally, and I think that's important that we are going down that, you know, we are exploring those areas where people want to know things. I think there'll be more agroforestry on the Newcastle University farms. Quite what that will look like, and whether that will be in our predominantly sort of around our grazing platform over at the dairy, or whether it will be other areas across Cockle Park, which is where our current agroforestry is, I don't know, to be considered. But I mean, we like it. So I think keep in touch for what happens next, and we'll keep telling you what happens. And I think that's it from me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So from net zero to pests to mango eating elephants, I think that was a really fantastic coverage there of everything agroforestry from 5 really fantastic keynote speakers. I think we're moving into the pitching section now. I'm just a bit conscious of time. So any questions or answers, I've collated them, and I will forward them along in the future to the keynotes if they've got capacity to answer them. But I think in the interest of time, we're going to switch to the pitching session. So I'm going to transfer to my co-host, Cameron, who's going to field this session.
Thanks, Chris. And yeah, hi, everyone. And yeah, just to reiterate, thanks so much to those keynote speakers for providing such a fascinating overview of the global agroforestry landscape. So in this section, it'll take about 30 minutes. We'll hear 9 pitches from a wide variety of stakeholders who are working on different agroforestry initiatives in the UK and Africa. Just for the presenters, when you're presenting, if you have multiple slides, when you'd like us to move on, please just flag that and say, next slide, please. First up, we've got Sven Verwiel, who's the technical director of Taluma Farm with Leaf Africa in Kenya, who will be discussing their forest foods initiative. So welcome, Sven, if you're available.
Thank you so much, guys, for having me. Great, everyone. Hello, and thanks for listening. Like I was introduced before, I am the managing director and co-founder of Forest Foods, technical director of Leaf Africa, and the co-founder of Tamalu Farm. But for today's purposes, I will focus on our agroforestry startup called Forest Foods. I am a Kenyan agri-entrepreneur, and this is our startup, Forest Foods. So for the next slide, please. So 78% of food production in Africa is still grown on small and medium scale farms, and the methods used to provide that food often cause deforestation and damage to local ecosystems, as well as yield low volume and poor quality harvests. These farmers lack access to modern practices and larger markets, so they're often forced to use expensive intermediaries or even participate in illegal charcoal and timber trades. Forest Foods introduces a new method of land stewardship and farming that provides health to the environment, the livelihoods of local communities, as well as new opportunities to achieve much higher profits. Next slide, please. We are pioneering the introduction of syntropic agroforestry in East Africa on a commercial level. This form of agroforestry produces food with higher nutritional density, quickly and continuously increases soil health, reforests landscapes, maximizes carbon sequestration, fosters biodiversity, and recreates natural ecosystems, all while precluding harmful agricides and synthetic fertilizers. These systems can grow a very wide variety of crops that appeal to many different consumers and markets. We currently, next slide, please, sorry. We currently operate a 3/4 hectare production site in Limuru at 2,200 meters above sea level. Our pilot project on Tamalu is 1/2 hectare and it's on 2,400 meters above sea level. And we are quickly expanding tenfold in the nearby Tatu city on Nairobi's outskirts at 1,580 meters above sea level. So these different agroecological zones help us to find suitable combinations of crops and indigenous trees while maximizing the variety of food crops for our customer base. We intend to set up our modular farms across all of Kenya's agroecological zones, and scalability will be achieved through future partnerships with landowners and organized groups of farmers, as well as on-farm center of excellence training facilities with a minimum 2-year paid internship program. We sell to impact-focused retailers at the moment and restaurants, and we are tapping into a rapidly growing market of health-conscious household consumers. To date, our team has raised 450,000 USD seed capital to get us started, and we are continuing to raise between 50 and 200 to allow us to scale up more rapidly. Next slide, please. And we welcome anybody interested in learning about the future of this type of farming to visit us on our farms, learn more on our website, and join our team. Thank you very much. I believe that was just under 2 minutes.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sven. Yeah, extremely efficient presentation and really interesting stuff. Next, we have Felicity Jones, the founder and director of Thinking Philanthropy in the UK, who's going to discuss how they can drive impact in agroforestry. So welcome, Felicity.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you all. I'll try and be as efficient. We set up Thinking Philanthropy really to focus on bridging the gap between impact and purpose-driven organisations globally and capital that focuses on impact and purpose. We see that there's a wall of green finance. It's called a green wall of finance. We see prioritization through the SDGs around water, biodiversity, reforestation, food security. Agroforestry seems as if it is the answer to all of that, and it also aligns with the priorities of impact investment, of philanthropy and development finance. Yet what we see is that there is a disconnect. There's a disconnect between the innovators and that finance. That disconnect is through actually a disbelief and a lack of knowledge that they are competitive within this space. There are also barriers which are shared between the UK and Africa, which are about level of funding required, the kind of multiplicity of approaches, perceived risk of investment or grant making, and also visibility as well as connectivity. Our work individually, one-to-one with organisations, working with cohorts, and now working in partnership with other organisations, as this slide illustrates, is about making that connection between the priorities within that capital market and also global priorities such as the African Development Bank's commitment to Africa becoming not only food secure, but a food exporter, and obviously the UK's commitment to net zero, and also to farming as a priority. Our focus is about giving visibility to the innovation that is emerging, bridging the funding and risk gap, and particularly working at that level between 30,000 and up to 1 million, which is the cutoff point for institutional investment. If you could just show the next slide, please. We're working with clients. You'll hear from one of them later, the Kipsina Crane and Wetlands Conservation Group. We're working to really understand how to support them to really articulate and receive the best value for that innovation. So that means all the way through. It means creating organizations such as a social enterprise to understand the value of that knowledge. We're also working to explore funding opportunities such as carbon credits, which I know are an emerging theme, but it's ensuring the value of those carbon credits are returned to those community-led innovators. Fundamentally, we're obsessed with efficacy and equity in the flow of finance, and we understand that innovation is coming from agroforesters within the UK and in Africa, and our job is simply to support them to explain that and to secure the resources that they need for that transition. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Felicity. Really interesting stuff. Next, we have Rosie Mercer, the Business Development Manager for Destination Livingstone in Zambia, who's going to be discussing agroforestry challenges and opportunities in Livingstone, Zambia.
Hello. I'm hoping my connection lasts. This is Livingstone beside Victoria Falls. We are a city of 150,000 people, which really makes us a small town, but we have a very village sort of mentality. What are our main challenges here in terms of deforestation is that charcoal. All the other issues that have already been mentioned are relevant here. But here, charcoal, we have a rural income for very poor people, but it's actually used by our urban dwellers. So there's a complete disconnect between the urban and rural requirements. Very old hardwood trees are being cut. There's no replanting, no seed collection, no nurseries, which is something we want to look at. There's also a lack of understanding of all the benefits of trees. And I've just written a few, such as temperature reduction. And I have to tell you right now, I'm sweating in my office, soil improvements, and also a whole range of new products. We have traditional land tenure, which has also been mentioned. And that means we have very low capital amongst our farmers. And our farmers are often the women. The men might have the ownership of the land, but it's the women who do most of the work. There's also quite a lot of skepticism at the moment on these mass tree planting initiatives. Lots of talks about poor survival rates, what species are actually being used. And we have elephants. We have a lot of elephants. They're here all year, but particularly between May and November. We have the migration through Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Zambia. So that obviously causes us a lot of different problems to some other parts of the world. Next slide, please. We do have opportunities, though. We have people here in Livingstone who do have a passion for better management of our land and preserving our forests. We have one forest around us which is 10,000 hectares, but it's also being abused badly at the moment. We do have access to land for replanting. Chief McCooney, who's one of the senior chiefs in our area, is very open to this kind of improvement scheme. We also have some small, medium enterprises involved in looking at charcoal alternatives and also better cooking schemes where the need for a lot of wood or charcoal is being reduced. And there is interest in commercializing traditional fruits, nuts, and then oils as well, although the knowledge base of that is still quite low. And tourists, we have a few 100,000 tourists every year. And we think that if we can do some kind of good agroforestry schemes, it would actually become tourist attraction. This year, Livingstone, our destination, won one of the only 3 Green Destination Awards in Africa. So we're very proud of that. We're at the bottom rung of the ladder, but we are on our journey. And basically here, what we're looking at is, you know, we need to hurry up for all sorts of reasons. But where do we start? We don't have really that many technically aware people in our area. I'm not saying they're not in Zambia, but we don't have a lot here. So where do we find technical support and financial support? I mean, elephants love marula. They actually get drunk on the fruit. So we can't really plant many marula trees. Winterthorn is another tree which is great for animal fodder, but elephants love it. So they'll come in to find it. So we are restricted in some ways that maybe other people are not aware of. So really, that's just my short presentation. We're on the start of our journey, and we're very open to anyone who might be prepared to assist. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rosie. Really interesting stuff. If I could just, in the interest of time, ask our pitchers to try and focus on keeping the presentations to 2 minutes so we can have more Q&A time at the end. Next, we've got Adam Charlton, Senior Research Fellow at the BioComposites Centre, Bangor University in the UK, who will discuss their seedling wrap for agroforestry in Uganda.
Thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to talk to you today. Yes, so I'm based in Wales on the western side of the UK. And I just wanted to give you a brief overview of a collaborative project we're running in Uganda, which is designed to develop a bio-based film wrap product for tree seedlings to support the sector there. Next slide, please. So yeah, just a bit of background to one of our collaborative partners. So the Mount Elgon Tree Growing Enterprise is a not-for-profit organisation based in eastern Uganda in a place called Mbale. It's supported by the Welsh Government's Wales for Africa programme through the Size of Wales charity. The Size of Wales charity is designed to provide funding and expertise to indigenous communities across the globe based in tropical regions with the aim of protecting or regenerating rainforest. There are a number of international tree planting programs ongoing in Kenya, Indonesia, Peru, Brazil, and one in Uganda. And the aim of this Size of Wales charity is to protect an area of rainforest the size of Wales, about 2 million hectares. So in Uganda, METGAY promotes and coordinates tree growing capabilities in that region. It grows a number of high-yielding, fast-growing varieties, including the umbrella tree, which you can see in the logo on the top right of the screen. And it has some ambitious tree planting targets, which is very close to reaching. One of the big challenges for METGAY is that all of these tree saplings, and you can see a photo there, are supplied in single-use polyethylene potting bags. There's no approved method of disposing or recycling these potting bags, and that creates a big issue with single-use plastics waste. That's particularly important at the moment because countries like Uganda and Kenya are looking to implement and enforce a ban on single-use plastics right across the supply chain. Next slide, please. Okay, so what's our project doing? We're actually coming to the end of a 6-month collaboration, a feasibility study, which is being kindly supported by Welsh Government. So along with ourselves at Bangor University and METGAY, we're also collaborating with an organisation called NARO in Uganda. So the National Agricultural Research Organisation is a government-financed agency which coordinates all publicly funded research in Uganda. And the aim of this feasibility study, as I said, is to try and develop a bio-based film wrap incorporating Ugandan industrial residues, agricultural residues, as an alternative to single-use plastics. And we're trying to develop a product which degrades in the ground, doesn't create any issues with plastics waste disposal. So it's a truly collaborative project. Ourselves at Bangor, we have a long track record in composite materials for packaging, polymer formulation and processing. Colleagues at NARO have a long-standing track record in bioplastics research. Colleagues at METGAY are doing in-field trials of the prototype films. And then we've also got colleagues at the School of Natural Sciences who are looking at the sort of effect on these microplastics and how they degrade in the soil. So looking at things like UV degradation, loss of mass over a period of time, and how the degradation of these microplastics may or may not impact on the soil chemistry. So what have we done so far? We've actually produced several meters of film wrap, which are being evaluated currently in Uganda. That slide in the bottom right shows the film wrap being used to grow umbrella tree seedlings. As I said, the collaboration is just coming to an end, but we've had our funding extended by 4 months through some GCRF funding. What we'd like to do at the end of the day is, if we can prove that this is a viable alternative to single-use plastics, is to set up a manufacturing facility in Uganda to produce these polymer seeding wraps using these agricultural residues that are generated in country. So that was a very quick run through. That was okay.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. What a fantastic project. Next, we have Nina Ockendon-Powell, the network manager at Connected, who are working as on a community network for vector-borne plant viruses. So welcome, Nina.
Thank you. Yes. Hello, everybody. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Connected. Could I have the slide up, please, Cameron? Thank you. Yes, the Connected Network is the community network for vector-borne plant viruses, and we're funded by the UK government. We started in 2017, and we're based at the University of Bristol, led by Professor Gary Foster, who's at Bristol, and Professor Neil Boonham, who's at Newcastle University. Connected builds a sustainable network of international scientists and researchers to address the challenges of vector-borne plant viruses, with a particular focus on sub-Saharan Africa. We focus on promoting sustainable solutions to ensure fair, nutritious and sustainable food production for all. We currently have over 1,500 members in 87 countries, most of whom are in sub-Saharan Africa. And our niche is bringing together expertise in plant pathology and entomology. But we're also interested in how we can enable translation of research outputs into solutions. We are guided by a 20-strong management board of international experts, headed up by our chair, Dr. Lava Kumar from IITA in Ibadan. We build capacity by funding new innovative research between the UK and Africa-based scientists when we have funds available. We also do this by working in partnership with international organisations to co-develop and co-deliver capacity building programmes for early career researchers and national agricultural research officers, and by running international networking events and providing online resources for our members on our website. We're interested in agroforestry for a number of reasons. It seems like a great approach for managing crop and tree pests and diseases and promoting healthy ecosystems. As you know, trees also suffer from vector-borne plant viruses. So we've heard cocoa mentioned today. Cocoa swollen shoot disease is caused by a virus spread by mealybugs. We're interested in supporting the transformation of farming systems towards climate resilience and supporting ecosystem restoration, for which agroforestry seems like a great approach. We have a lot of integrated pest management expertise within the network. We have a strong focus on delivering impact through using a theory of change driven approach that's underpinned by robust monitoring, learning and evaluation. So we're really keen, we're really open to new collaborations and partnerships. So do get in touch if you think there are opportunities for us to work together. And that's the end of my pitch.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Nina. Next, we have Joseph Gitigi, Director of Rwathia Agrofarms in Kenya, who are working on avocado orchards for afforestation. Joseph.
Hope I'm well, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Cameron. Ours is a use of fruit trees for agroforestry. Next slide, please. Fruit farming is an agroforestry practice that can be used to mitigate climate change through the sequestration of carbon in soils and biomass, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from deforestation and agricultural activities. Fruit trees are especially beneficial because the fruit is edible and can be sold or consumed by farmers or community members. Planting fruit trees such as macadamia and avocado promote afforestation and reforestation practices which contribute to a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and also improve the environment by increasing air and water quality, soil fertility, and bring in incomes for the small-scale farmers at the bottom of value chain. Our premise at Rwathia Agrifarm is that if we want to plant many thousands of trees for carbon and nature benefit, we should invest in good fruit orchards and agroforestry. This includes protecting, restoring, and creating new organic orchards and supporting farmers in using agroforestry approaches. The core benefits of more fruit trees include enterprise, incomes, and jobs, and nutritional security. The potential of fruit trees to optimize the combined benefits of livelihoods, food security, nutrition, and climate mitigation and adaptation is promising but not yet fully understood nor applied in practice. Therefore, this project seeks to increase avocado trees growing in targeted agricultural landscapes in Kenya. It is anticipated that fruit trees will provide nutritional diversity, increased food supply, and sellable surplus production to people in need, thereby contributing towards increased household incomes. Venture into fruit farming and be part of the environmental conservation goals. So we welcome everybody who want to come on board, and we can do this together in Kenya. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Joseph. What a fantastic project. Next, we have Rebecca Cole-Coker, Creative Director of PCI Technology Investments Limited UK, who will be discussing their FarmSmarter app. Rebecca?
Hello. Hi, it's lovely to be here. Right, though we have developed this FarmSmarter app. It is conceived by our founder, Paul Coker, who wanted to create a tool to help smallholder farmers in developing countries to become sustainable and profitable. Next slide, please. We won Innovate UK funding to develop the prototype and proof of concept of the app. And we were lucky to work with Manchester Metropolitan University in the UK and with the University of Agriculture in Nigeria. We have developed an AI crop disease diagnosis tool, and we have also got a field mapping and yield prediction element to the app. One of the most important things that we're doing is building digital farming communities, and the feedback that we've had from our farmers is absolutely fantastic. We've got farmers in 4 states of Nigeria. They're incredibly enthusiastic, they're desperate for knowledge, and they really want to find out new ways of increasing their productivity and also becoming more sustainable in their farming. Next slide, please. So why we did it? We all need to feed 2 billion more people on the planet by 2050. And smallholdings are key to this. If we can encourage them to be more sustainable and more productive, that will help everybody on the planet. Farming in developing regions is often underproductive, and we believe that agroforestry could be key to improving this. Next slide, thank you. So as a natural solution to land degradation and moisture loss, agroforestry is something that we're interested in exploring. We'd like to collaborate with new researchers, and we're really keen to help disseminate more information to the farmers that are out there in Nigeria and the rest of Africa. We've also started working with farmers in Latin America as well. So we've got links with government agencies, farming associations, and already we've got over 5 million farmers in the pipeline waiting to come and use our application. So we're obviously looking to collaborate with anybody who's interested in joining us on this amazing journey. And hopefully you would be interested in talking to us a bit further about what we're doing. Next slide. So our project is really about helping our smallholders to move from their subsistence level farming and achieve their success in a climate smart way. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rebecca. What an innovative and high impact app. Next, we've got Maurice Wanjala, an advisory expert at Kipsena Conservation Group in Kenya. Do we have Maurice?
Yes. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Go ahead.
It's Maurice Wanjala. I'm the founder director of Kipsena Crane and Wetland Conservation Group, and also I'm the Western Kenya Conservation Advisor. I founded Kipsena Crane and Wetland Conservation Group with a vision of integrating conservation with community livelihood. As a young man, I could see the impact of unsustainable farming and forestry, and also the daily challenges facing the communities living in and around the said ecosystem. Kipsena is based in Kenya, upstream Kenya's smallest park, Saiwa Swamp National Park, which is a home of iconic and endangered animal, the crested crane, the aquatic antelope Sitatunga, and the primate family, the Brasa monkey. Also critical at tracing Kenya's position as a water scarce country and the potential for agroforestry to deliver meaningful work and sustainable livelihoods through knowledge of indigenous tree management, innovative building techniques, and cooking, minimizing the use of trees and fuel. Kipsena Crane and Wetland Conservation Group has pioneered development of tree nurseries to grow and plant indigenous trees to encourage our native species back. Over 50 of the senior role are filled by women, and we also prioritize youth for training in the sustainable skills needed for now and for the future. A key challenge is financing for this holistic model. Funders and donors tend to focus on one area, and we also need to persuade small holders and other farmers to switch to positive techniques of agroforestry. Funding their transition is hard. In 2021, we became a global partner of Ecosia, whose funding supports this approach, and who is seeking through their sister World Fund to support transition of agriculture. In 2022, we are also awarded the first of up to 3 forest blocks in Kenya government under the Adopt a Forest scheme to turn a peri-urban block into productive agroforest. To be able to scale and even diversify funding from grants, we are now establishing a sister social enterprise by the name Africa, which will enable us secure trading income and invest to support our communities to transition of sustainability. This will also allow us to develop vocational training and return income from the carbon credit and nature systems funds to our community. I beg to end there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Maurice.
I think I've been within the 2 minutes.
Yes,
time.
that was great. I'm sure people will be looking to connect after the event. And we have our final pitch now from Andrew Emmett, the chair at the Nino Macadamia Trust, working in the UK and Malawi on macadamia agroforestry. Andrew.
Thank you very much. So the focus of my work is facilitating change in nut value chains, primarily from Malawi, looking at macadamia and peanuts in particular. What I'd like to talk about today is work that Nino Macadamia Trust is doing to develop a climate smart macadamia agroforestry system in Malawi and looking for partners to collaborate on that. Next slide, please. So as has been mentioned by a number of people, deforestation, land degradation, there's a whole set of issues that we're all familiar with. But one of the things that I'm particularly concerned about is not just increased temperature, but the loss of tree from the landscape results in diurnal temperature change. And the photo in this slide shows the difference between bare soil and under the tree. So trees are really useful in terms of changing temperature, but also diurnal temperature change. Next slide, please. So we, as I say, we're focusing on climate smart macadamia agroforestry, aiming to reduce deforestation, regenerate soils, conserve water, and reduce the impact of climate shocks. Initially, when we started up this work nearly 30 years ago, we thought macadamia would be primarily an income generating opportunity for farmers. But what we're finding is that it is not only improving incomes, but food security, because the nut comes off the tree at a time of the year when the annual crops are still maturing. And if there's drought or flood at that time, there's still a crop on the tree. So the intercropping is really useful. Next slide, please. So our approach with the climate smart macadamia agroforestry is to establish a pilot carbon damage mitigation system. We've been working with academics from Imperial College on this. We've developed a mobile phone app, and what we're aiming to do is to work within the communities for the farmers and the co-op technicians to do their own surveys, and then the data is collated here in UK. And we're increasingly looking for partners who are empathetic to our approach. We're not going for a large scale. We're starting at a small scale at a community level. Next slide, please. And we're developing a certificate which we will align with Plan Vivo or similar in time. But essentially what we're trying to do is to link not just the work with the farmers in UK, but to try and drive change with the organisations that we're partnering with in UK. And I'm happy to discuss that with anyone who is interested. Next slide, please. We are, as I say, we have been piloting this for 5 years, and we're at the point where we're looking to expand. Some of the barriers that have been discussed at all sections of the value chain are challenging. The smallholder farmers need incentives to plant and grow trees. We're looking at the value chains for the products that they're producing, but we're also looking to partner with organizations who are interested in investing in the approach that we're taking. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That was really interesting. And thanks to all of our pitch speakers for such fascinating presentations. I'm sure we're going to have really exciting connections emerging from there. So I'm just going to pass us back over to Chris now to take us into the last section of the event.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cameron. Thank you to all of our speakers, from the keynotes down to the pitches. I think it just really highlights just the fantastic work that's going on in the area of agroforestry and beyond. We are running a touch behind time, so next slide, please. I think one of the things that we're really keen to press on with is breakout sessions, so I won't have you too long. Just to say, after this event, we'll release this collaboration document, which, with those who have consented to, all their details will be there, so you can follow up. But if you haven't joined the collaboration document and you want to reach out to someone specific who's attended today, just please get in touch, and this is something we can also facilitate. We just have a LinkedIn group that also will be a really good networking opportunity there as well. Thanks.